at the time that Christ subjugates the nations to his authority, they create a plot to offset him from his throne. Is anybody surprised about that? If you thought you were going to be the next king of the world, as the king of the north may think of himself, or you thought you were the greatest power and authority in the world, as the President of the United States thinks of himself, wouldn't you kind of be enraged? And wouldn't, if you lost your power, wouldn't you begin to think, okay, how can we get this back? You would want to retaliate. You would create a resistance, wouldn't you? Just like we see in the fictional tales of movies today, and like we actually see in the resistance against the current government. Because political powers do not accept the fact that they lose their control. So this is what happens when Christ takes control. And so they plot a vain thing. And the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together. So somehow or another, even though they've been deprived of their power, they have the ability, there's still enough, if you want to call it this, freedom in the world for them to get together and create a conspiracy against, as it says in the end of verse 2, the Lord and against his anointed, that would be the Messiah in his role, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. This is obviously not that they are entirely imprisoned. Well, I think that's the net result of this progression of events. But the bonds and the cords that they are bound with are the same bonds that are loosed at the end of the 1,000 years, when Satan thinks in another conspiracy that he can take control of the throne of David on which Christ has sat for 1,000 years. So their cords and their bonds are, their power has been bound up. Their authority, the perception that their ideology is worth fighting for has been completely bound up. And they're frustrated. They are incapable of creating any kind of insurrection against Christ, who has now taken control not only of the Middle East, but of all the countries in the world. People in South America are going to be in this assembly. People from Europe, rulers, former rulers, they have no power anymore. I'm not sure if you can describe, because you got to probably be there to see it and understand what exactly happens. You can describe the mechanics of this, how this occurs. It's just that they have no more power. It could be that they have enfolded their armies into the powers of the Middle East. In this case, it's Christ and his saints. And one by one, progressively, the armies of the world are enfolded into their destruction. And once the armies are destroyed, how are you going to assert your power anymore? That's the only way. I mean, how many movies do we have to see, or television programs, or look at the news to see how people assert their power? It's with explosives. It's with gunfire. They blow things up and break things. That's what they do, and kill people. That's how power is asserted in this world, and that's how control is taken. If you don't have a military mechanism left to do that with, what are you going to use to create your resistance? You got nothing. So, what the response from God is, and this I think may be God speaking as he is manifested on the throne. So, it depends on how you read heavens here. If heavens is the political powers of the world, and Christ is on that throne, that's one way of looking at it. That isn't diminished by seeing this as God in the heaven of heavens, who sits on his throne in heaven, manifested in Christ, doing this work of subjugating the nations to his power. It says, he who sits in the heavens shall laugh. It's like, are you kidding me? You're going to create a conspiracy now after witnessing and knowing this is Christ, witnessing that the fact that he has destroyed the armies of this world. He's taken control of the Middle East. And I don't know, this could be just after he does that and just before he subjugates all the nations to his authority. But at some point, it's in that process that they create this conspiracy. And God's response is to laugh. I think just because it's absurdly funny after this kind of manifestation of his miraculous power for anyone to think they can come back and create a resistance that will overthrow it again. is actually funny. It's about as funny as telling Sarah at the age of 90 years old that she's going to have a baby. I mean, she laughed, and she named Isaac Isaac because it was funny. It was so impossible, and yet it happened. In this case, the laughter goes the other way. And it says, the Lord holds them in derision. And then it says he speaks to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. He then says, this sounds like it's God speaking, doesn't it? Yet I have set my king on my holy hill in Zion, and I will declare the decree that comes from this authority. The Lord has said to me, now this sounds like this is now Christ speaking. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today have I begotten you. And that's very interesting, because this word begotten was used to describe the miraculous birth of Christ from Mary, and now it's used to describe the miraculous enthronement and subjugation by his power and authority in Jerusalem when he takes control of Zion. And God says again, today I have begotten you. In other words, the sonship of Jesus is now manifested in his control of the world. He was never meant to be anything else. Raised in the image of God and raised to be in total control of this world. So, speaking of Christ, he says, ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance. So that's the promise to Abraham. That's how it is that Christadelphians take their existence. It's based on this promise that God would give Abraham and Christ and those that are Christ at his comings the nations for their inheritance. But you'll notice he's not saying that all the land that Abraham saw in this context, is he? That was north, south, east, west. That's the land of Palestine. He's not saying that here. He's saying he's created an extension of that promise, the promise to Abraham. In other words, the promise to Abraham and to Christ is not rulership of the Middle East. It's rulership of the world. He was meant to be king of all kings. So he says, ask of me and I will give you the nations for your inheritance. And just to make it clear what we're talking about, the ends of the earth for your possession. So this promise not only goes to Abraham and to Christ, but as Galatians 3 tells us, it goes to those who are Christ's at his coming. From the time I could understand language as a 2-year-old, my mother told me that we were going to be in a kingdom where the ownership of the world will belong to Christ and those that are his. And all my life, every time something happened that was bad, she would remind me of the day in which I would feel better if I was sick, or I would not feel so sad if I had been bullied, or if I was depressed. I would be happy in that day when Christ is in control. And when we used to go to the beach and I couldn't swim, she'd say to me, well, one day you'll be able to swim like a dolphin if you want to. And if I was feeling a little heavy, she'd say, you'll be able to fly in the kingdom. And I was just saying this recently to somebody, I don't remember who it was, but there are verses that are indicative of flying in the kingdom. It may not be flying like a bird, except the verse in Isaiah that says, who are these that fly up to their windows like doves? What's that referring to? Why is there any reference in the prophecies of Isaiah to these that fly up to their windows like doves? It could be a metaphor, and it could be speaking of the gravityless, weightless power of saints. And why would you say that saints are weightless? Because they're not bound to the natural laws of the world anymore. And how do we know that? Well, Ezekiel speaks about Christ and his saints hovering over cities in order to judge them. And there's another verse that refers to hovering Christ and his saints and their power, hovering over Jerusalem. So that's flight. When Philip was translated away from the eunuch, and when Jesus was translated out of the crowd that was going to throw him over the cliff, how did he get from one place to another instantaneously? You could call that flight. Jesus said, pray that your flight be not in winter. And I think that refers to the flight out of the destruction of Jerusalem mostly, but We know that two will be in the field, one taken and the other left. Two will be sleeping in the bed, one taken and the other left. How are they taken? And where are they taken? They're taken by angels, and they're taken to the judgment. So that is a flight as well. So it's not a stretch if you piece all these little minuscule things together to say that there will be a greater power than the power of gravity that holds us to the earth, and we will no longer be bound by it. So it says in verse 9, just a little aside there about the power. It says in verse 9, you shall break them with a rod of iron. This is the ends of the earth, the nations that are all over the earth. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and you shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. So this is another verse that indicates that although the grace of the Lord has been presented to and startled the nations now for 2,000 years, the operation of his grace in the great declaration of what is available through the sacrifice of Christ in the form of salvation, that has now been changed into the force of God's judgment against the nations, and that's basically where we are, the judgments against the world, which is a destructive force because they don't understand any other language except the language of destruction. So it says, you shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Verse 10, now therefore be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. And then it says, this is a remarkable verse. Kiss the Son. In other words, you should be affectionate and appreciate this king because he's brought peace to this world with the destruction of your armies like a potter's vessel. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. So there is grace in this moment. He's bound them. They're powerless. He's given them enough rope to have a conspiracy. And now he speaks to them. And that's what it says. He speaks to them in his anger. And he says, kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. When his wrath is kindled but a little. This is the law that proceeds from Christ's mouth. It's a law that isn't based on wrath. It's based on righteousness. But it will be exercised initially in wrath because people will be so stubborn as to oppose it. Nobody will be interested in a righteous law. They prefer to go back to the unrighteous, conflicting, confusing laws and the laws that have brought the ruination of the world. They prefer to go back to those laws. But these are the laws of Christ that operate like a rod of iron. And a rod of iron, in this case, is laws that are unbendable. When Christ asserts his law against the nations, that law will be unbendable. Nobody's going to change it. Nobody's going to reinterpret it. There's not going to be an originalist and then a modernist interpreting his laws. His laws will come straight from God and from what he's observed in this earth, from the time he saw the foul law of the Pharisees operating as an adversary against God in his first coming, to the times when all the laws of this world are enforced to overthrow him when he is subjugating the nations to his power, to the time when he's seated on the throne and he says, these are the laws by which the world will operate now. And those laws not only will be righteous, but they will take care of all the conflicts and issues and foul outworkings of these foul spirits of liberty and fraternity and equality, these things that start good and turn foul in the world. All of those are going to be rearranged and corrected by Christ's laws. So let me ask you a question. If you were Christ and you were going to create righteous law, you're already in training to think about righteous law, are you not? This is what we do every time we have to make a judgment as parents who are trying to raise godly seed, as people in an ecclesia who are trying to find peace and stability and love in an ecclesia through God's word, and as a brotherhood in this world that has no power or authority whatever in the world, but that operates on the basis of rules acting like law in order to create a system of order that enables that brotherhood to set a boundary, which is a righteous border for sanctification in Christ, a boundary like the priests of Israel removed and were rebuked by God for doing. But this is these are the kinds of laws that you're in training to understand. So if you were to create righteous laws that are going to rectify something in this world, what law would you impose on the world to set things straight? This may be a difficult question for you, but it's an interesting question, I think, worth spending 5 minutes on. Okay, so John has said, in case those of you who are on remote, John has made the point that the royal law, having two aspects, given in the law of Moses and reiterated by Christ, thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Those two primary points of the royal law would be first and foremost in the assertion of law in this world, because instead of loving God, men have loved themselves, and they loved their ideologies. They've loved their indulgences. They've loved the things they've made. They're in love with their technology, are they not? So to apply that law and change from loving ideology and technology to apply loving God first and your neighbor, then what would need to be rearranged in ideologies and technology, for example, as they affect education and industry? What laws would you put on education and on industry that would convert men's hearts from loving themselves and their governments and their ideologies and their technologies to loving God first and their neighbor as themselves? Well, for example, you'd have to shut down the internet, wouldn't it? Because it's a big tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God said to Adam and Eve, don't eat of that tree. Eat of the tree of life. You'd have to convert the technology that brings the knowledge of good and evil into every pocket of nearly every person in the world who has a phone in their pocket. You'd have to convert that into some kind of rearrangement so that instead of feeding off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to everyone's detriment, it's just the explosion of what Adam and Eve did in the garden, now worldwide, affecting the lives of little children and grown men and women and even constituencies of nations, which, for example, brought about through the use of the internet the Arab Spring. I'm not going to make a judgment about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that men were able to organize themselves in rebellion because of the internet. So how would you change that to eating of the tree of life? Well, the tree of life is not going to be in your pocket in the kingdom. Where's the tree of life going to be?
Oh, are you asking me?
Anybody?
Sorry. In your heart.
Well, no. There's going to be trees of life with fruit healing the nations in the temple. The tree of life is essentially going to be from Jerusalem. I mean, that's metaphorical, but my Christadelphians have believed for 170 years that it's going to be literal in the trees that line the river with bearing fruit and leaves that go for the healing of the nations. And Christ, sacrificed metaphorically speaking, was a tree of life, but now he's on his throne giving law. So the tree of life is going to convert from Jesus hanging on a cross to Jesus sitting on a throne, and its fruit will be changed from something that is in your heart to something that becomes the law of the world. So how, if your information about, or to put it, use the metaphor, if feeding from the tree of life changes from feeding off the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we do now, to feeding off the tree of life, which comes from the fruit at the rulership of Christ on his throne in Jerusalem, then the internet has to be killed. That tree of life has to be destroyed. The tree of knowledge of good and evil has to be shut down or converted. I think it's going to be shut down. It's the first thing I would do if I was in control. I will not be in control. But if I was, the first thing I would do is shut the internet down. There is so much, there's a lot of knowledge, isn't there, good and evil on the internet to be taken. If we want to know what happened to somebody, I pick my computer up and Google it. What happened to them? And I do this all the time. Whatever happened to that thing? Where can I find this? And you go to Amazon and it's there. So there's that. It's sort of neutral to good. I find out medical remedies and health remedies on the internet if you could trust them. So that's good. But what about the evil? What about the incitement to violence, or the incitement to immorality, or the incitement to suicide that occurs, or the incitement to bullying that occurs? And it's just everywhere present. The incitement to abuse, the incitement to molestation that is all over the internet. Well, that needs to be destroyed, and I don't see how you can take the bad out and leave the good in. I'm not sure the good is all that good anyway. There's going to be a much better good that comes from the tree of life. So if you shut the internet down, that's a huge measure that comes from the law of Christ, from the throne of righteousness, that will begin to create this love that John referred to. But you don't just tell people to love God and love their neighbor and have them do it. And the nations will be full of people who still have human nature. So that has to be reined in and brought under control. So that's the adversary, the devil, which is human nature, worldwide, has to be bound up for 1,000 years. That will only come from law and from healing. The law is what produces the healing. So in the kingdom, the way you would change this feeding off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to this feeding off the tree of life, which will be available to the whole world in the kingdom, will be you'll have to go to Jerusalem to get your knowledge. That's one way. There's one other way where you get your knowledge or feed off the tree of life. Speaking figuratively, there will be 144,000 men and women who have now been changed into saints. Their bodies have been changed and their minds have been perfected in love. They will be distributed worldwide in all the little places where there used to be convents and colleges and schools and computer monitors and even in phones. They will be worldwide, all over the place. To be, I don't know, the count is impossible for us to make. It's a host of people. The figurative number is 12 times whatever there was in the wilderness, 12 times 12,000, to a number 144,000, which is an exponent of what God did in Israel with law. And now that exponent is present worldwide, seated in chairs that are an extension of the throne of Christ all over the world. So you can picture if Christ sends us back to our areas, just thinking this through a little bit, we might all find ourselves back in Norfolk and Virginia Beach and Chesapeake and South Hill, only as an immortalized saint set up as a place where people go to get the knowledge of God. So if there's a question about what to do with the city, first of all, I think city plans will be brought back to regions by the saints, and they will oversee the rebuilding of the cities that were destroyed by Christ in his judgments at the time of his coming. We'll get there eventually in this series. I'm still on the starting slide, but I've got a few slides to go through. So I'm sorry, I'm not wandering. This is the point. We're just milking it a little bit here. But when all the saints are distributed worldwide, and is in effect cloning of Christ, his mentality, his mental disposition, his spirit, his love, his wisdom, and now sharing that mind, that's going to be kind of like the network connection that goes worldwide that people feed from in this tree of life. People will have access directly to the immortalized mind of Christ as it has been multiplied worldwide and now sits everywhere present as the governing authority in all the little places of the world. You can see why the plan of God was meant to make myriads of people to rule the world. If Christ is on his throne in Jerusalem and there's nobody else, he can't do it. He can't get in all the places of the world and have immediate access to all the questions that come up and all the plans that will be implemented, the way commerce takes place, if there even is such a thing as commerce, the way information is distributed, the way children are educated. All of this is now being executed by Christ and his saints as a multiplicity of people, a multitude of people who are distributed worldwide. Can you think of any better way to disseminate righteousness in the world than that as a plan? That's it. That's what we believe. That's what's been planned from the beginning. That's what God has assured people he will do in the day when his saints, this host of people, become Yahweh Elohim and Yahweh Sabaoth in the word. Let's just make a distinction between those terms. Yahweh Elohim is the mighty ones. Yahweh Sabaoth is the military host. These are two branches of Christ's power when he makes his judgments against the world. And they come to us as power of righteousness that is in the form of the light of Christ, distributed worldwide through his saints. And the power of fire, which is his destructive power against the nations when he makes his judgments. And so that's why this psalm ends by saying, "Blessed are those who put their trust in him." That's an understatement. So you may think of yourself, will I ever sit on a throne in Chesapeake and tell people what it's all about? Well, not as you are presently. I know you would think, I don't ever want to really sit on a throne. I've got nothing to say. But I think in your heart, Sandy and Russ and Eric and Wendy and Mike and Jordan and John, in your heart, you've got a lot of thoughts about what would make things right. And those thoughts aren't wrong thoughts. They're right thoughts because you've got, those thoughts have been nourished in the soil of faith. And what's growing out of that is fruit. If no place else, in your ability to endure hardship through this world. And that endurance is it will be a useful tool in the education of righteousness that goes worldwide in the type of Christ's coming. So you are blessed with the knowledge of the truth and with an introduction to righteous thinking and judgment and law. And that converts, that's all driven by the love of God, loving God and the love of God toward man and the love of neighbor. That's when law will be cohesive with love. And it will operate to bring love to all the neighbors of the world, beginning with Christ and you spread worldwide, teaching people how to love and what the finer points of love are. How love works not only in instruction, but in correction and reproof, in righteousness. That's how faith works in us. So let's go now to the next slide. We've still got 15 minutes left, which are pretty good. Which is about the subject we're entering into is that when God's judgments are asserted against the world, or in the world, they have two primary aspects: fire and light. And if you think about it, they're the same. Light comes from fire. Why do I say that? Well, because the sun is burning, isn't it? And that's where we get our light. Fortunately, we're 93 million miles away, so it doesn't feel like fire to us. It feels like light, and it feels warm, right, when we need warm. But if you stay out in it too long, when we're a little bit closer to the sun, what happens in the summertime? That light will burn you because its source is fire. So when you speak about fire and light, you are speaking about power that emanates from God. We know that God is an everlasting fire. He's described that way in Scripture, on one hand. On the other hand, it says that God dwells in light, unapproachable. The brightness of God's character in fire and light is given to us, literally and metaphorically, by the brightness of the sun. It's a star that is so bright that we live by its light and its warmth, but you can't stare at it without going blind. So it's too bright to look at. That's a sort of a closer illustration of what unapproachable light is. The sun is unapproachable light. And that's where God dwells. He doesn't dwell in the sun. He dwells in the heaven of heavens, which I believe is outside of the universe. So that brings up the subject of the relationship between fire and light as they apply to God and his judgments. This is what Malachi 4 says, verses 1 and 2. For behold, the day comes that shall burn as an oven. All right, that's the day of the Lord's appearing. It's the day of Jacob's trouble. It's the day of rain, when God will rain down righteousness on the world, and it is the day of his judgments. That day shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yes, all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that comes shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. That's the wicked. They're just going to be burned up. I don't think this is speaking metaphorically. Because God said to Noah, you remember, when he destroyed the world with water, he said, I will never destroy. This was the covenant that God made with Noah. I will never destroy the world again with water, but next time with fire. And the world means the constituted wicked of the world, as described here in Malachi 4, verses 1 and 2. But then look at what verse 2 says. God is speaking about fire and light in this world. So in the first step, he says, I will destroy the wicked. I will burn them up, and they shall be as stubble. But then in verse 2, he says, but unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise. This is light coming into the world, and warmth, with healing in his wings. This is the same power. The power of fire as it destroys the wicked, and the power of light as it brings knowledge, righteousness, and healing to the world, and love and healing to the world. The Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go forth and grow up as calves from the stall. We're going to be looking at this as we go. May not get there this week, but we will get there next week. But let's just look at this Son of Righteousness arising with healing in his wings, because it's a mixed metaphor. The sun doesn't have wings. Son of Righteousness sounds like the rising of the sun in the morning, doesn't it? And it's very bright. It suffuses the world with light, with life, with all that plants need to get photosynthesis and continue their growth. And whatever good comes from plant life, from the vegetation of the world, that's brought about by the light of the sun. But animals come out, we wake up, symbolizing in ourselves the resurrection in the early morning. And the day is a good thing. We all like the day better than the night, don't we? It's an interesting metaphor in the Bible, and I think it's literal as well, that wicked people don't like light. They prefer to sleep all day and come out at night in the darkness. That's when they party, that's when they do their evil. They do it under cover, under the cloak of darkness. But this comparison brings in this metaphor of the Son of Righteousness arising with healing in his wings. So we know that's speaking about Christ and the light of his power illuminating the world with peace and goodness and love. Why does it say healing in his wings? Well, you remember, I think that's an allusion to the cherubim. It's just a speculative guess on my part, but I don't think you could prove it in the context of Malachi 1 through 2, but probably an allusion to the cherubim whose wings went from one side of the temple to the other. And in the center, they were overshadowing the mercy seat. Well, if you look at wings in the Bible as a subject, it means extents. In other words, when a bird flies and spreads its wings, to the tip of its wings, that's the extent of its elevating, the mechanics that elevate a bird in the lift of the wind, and it means extents. So in the Bible, the hem of Aaron's garment is used is the extent of his, symbolically, of the covering that it makes up his priesthood. So there's a relationship between wings and hems of garments in the sense that they both represent the extents of something. Well, in the mercy seat, it was the extent of God's mercy from one end of the earth to the other. That's what wings means in the temple. It's the full extent, the overarching power of God's mercy from one end of the earth to the other. His love and his mercy. It's really a beautiful idea. This idea comes to us in Psalm 133. Just look at this again here. Psalm 133, speaking about the sweetness of unity, which we will experience in a way that we've always longed for on the time of Christ's coming. where he says, "Behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell in unity." This will be the ultimate, have its ultimate manifestation in the kingdom. Then he says, it's like the precious oil, that is the anointing of a priesthood, upon the head, running down upon the beard of Aaron. And it starts with his head, and it goes to the full extent of his stature, running down to the edge of his garments. That's the same sense. It may be the same word, I think it is the same word, as wings. So there's a relationship between the anointing of the high priest on one hand and the full extent of God's mercy as represented in the cherubim on the other. In each case, what that means is that God's love and his mercy goes from one end of the earth to the other. And that's the healing that are in the wings of the Son of Righteousness when he arises with healing in his wings. His wings go from one end of the earth to the other. This is a beautiful figure. So on one hand, it says that the judgments of God will burn them up with fire, literally. And on the other hand, it speaks of the Son of Righteousness as a light in the world, and that light produces healing and life. So you can see that what you have here is a differentiation of God's judgments, operating as fire to destroy the wicked on one hand, and light to bring life to the world on the other. In the same respect that his power is a combination, sourcing in himself as the same thing, fire and light. In other words, God's judgments have two forms, fire and light. This is very much like the Urim and the Thummim that were contained within the ephod of the priest, and he brought them and made judgments. One was dark and one was light. And if the dark stone was face up, then you had a negative judgment. If the white side of the stone was face up, then you had a positive judgment. So God's judgments have always been rendered in two forms: judgment that destroys and judgment that saves, like the sun. It will burn up the wicked, and it will heal them that fear his name. So this is a beautiful illustration of the fire side. Someone took a picture of the sun. And you get this from Deuteronomy 9:3, the same idea, that the Lord thy God is he which goes before you as a consuming fire. As a consuming fire, he will destroy them. That's God. That's his power, and that's his judgment against the wicked. Fire and death. On the other hand, this is another picture of the sun that shows its light. Isn't that lovely? Like, you can't look at it, but if we put a special filter on a camera and take a picture of it, you can see it, how magnificent it is. This burning ball of material that has an everlasting quality to it, in the sense that it just doesn't ever burn out for millions of years. But the Lord, it says, in contrast from Isaiah 60, verse 19, will be your everlasting light. And your God will be your glory. So you have God's judgments in fire and death, and you have them in light and life. So this is why Daniel says, speaking of those that become like God, in the 12th chapter and the 3rd verse, in context of what we are saying, they that be wise, that is, the people who know the truth and who live according to their faith, who receive the grace of God and live by it, they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. The brightness of the firmament is the sun. They'll shine like the sun. They will shine with the sun, as the Son of Righteousness arising with healing in his wings. The first thing that light will do when it hits you, it will change you. It will take away all your weight. It will take away all your pain. It will take away your worries, the frustrations of your life. Your sins will be entirely wiped out completely. And it will convert you into a being whose face is like Moses when he came down from the mountain, full of light. You will be energized by the power of God, and you'll be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. And that weight, that burden of pain and sin that weighs you down so heavily today will be completely lifted. No wonder we'll be weightless when we're immortal. no longer bound by the weight of sin and death. So we are at an ending point today. What we're going to start to look at next week, a more detailed look in the world of the effects of this king of the north coming to his end as being a symbol of the adversary of God, now in the powers of the world, coming to their end. The spiritual hosts of wickedness in all the high places of the world. They will come to their end. We're going to look closely next week at the prophetic effects of that miraculous event. What happens when the head of the serpent is crushed and no one will help him?